Excuse me while I get a drink of water, and then we'll get started. Today we're going to do something a little bit different. We're going to share some ideas and share some techniques. And we're doing this in full awareness that both the ideas and the techniques that we're going to share are never going to be enough. Never going to be enough. That's the paradox. That's one of the paradoxes. Today we're going to talk about getting beyond the paradox, getting beyond the pair of opposites. See, in some of the Eastern traditions, they firmly hold to the belief that if we look at the pair of opposites, there is something beyond the pair of opposites where they are not really opposites, where they are part of a whole. We, in our limited experience and our limited ability to comprehend, to express, to use language and pictures and art and all of these things, to try to express, knowing that these are all very limited, we still see the opposites, and we are stuck in the paradox. And we believe that the paradox is the end point, is as far back as you can get, let's put it that way. And yet there are other traditions that tell us, but wait, there's more. There's more beyond that. There's something else that is there. If we try to use physics, my limited understanding of physics, you have to keep in mind that due to physics and calculus, I lost my draft deferment and wound up in the Army. So my understanding is certainly limited. But if we try to grasp this concept of the Big Bang, which is a theory, there are other theories, but it is a theory. And in that theory, everything starts, the starting point that they use is the singularity, the oneness. Everything is completely one. Everything is compacted down into an infinitesimal place. And nothing that we experience today is there. See, all of our knowledge, all of our ways of understanding in the scientific method, we have to weigh it, we have to measure it, we have to touch it, we have to feel it. We can think about it and theorize it and create thought experiments and then convert those into mathematical expressions of the thoughts. But none of that was there at the singularity. The paradoxes, the opposites, were all one. We're all one. But something moved upon the singularity. And we had the Big Bang. And everything started to expand. And from this apparent nothingness of the singularity comes everything. So if we look at it in terms of physics, we can see that all that there is came from one, from the singularity. And yet we have no idea what that singularity is. We would be unable to describe it by our ways of thinking and measuring, because those ways are not applicable. And if you ask the question of, well, what was before that? What was beyond that? It's an unanswerable question. It is the mystery. There was nothing, there was something, but we have no way of knowing. Not with the tools of thinking that we have today. So I read something yesterday that just kind of, I think, encapsulated the ideas that we've been sharing for the last few weeks. And what I read is this. It says that if we wish to know something, we must find the appropriate way to know it. Otherwise, we won't know it. We will just have a shadow of it. We will have an opinion of it. We will have an idea. But we won't have a veritable truth. We will know what we think about it, but we won't know it. We won't know it. And part of the struggle, if we want to think of it as a struggle, or part of the journey, if we want to think of our journey, of what is this journey that we're on, is that perhaps we have been trying to know it in a manner that is not appropriate for how it can be known. And I know that sounds a little bit odd, but I want you to think about this, you know. If I want to know how something tastes, I can put it on the scale and I can weigh it. I could take a picture of it and see what it looks like. I could put my ear to it to hear what it sounds like. And what I'm doing is I am trying to know it in a way that is not appropriate for what I really want to know, which is how does it taste? In a similar fashion, if I want to know, for example, calculus, I want to understand calculus. Just checking to make sure the mic is on. It is. If I want to know calculus, it won't do me a bit of good to get a textbook on English grammar. Now, English grammar is a fine subject. But studying English grammar is not an appropriate way to know calculus. So what we are dealing with in our, I will call it a spiritual journey, okay? What we are dealing with in our spiritual journey is there is that which is calling us unto itself. The Hindu mystics say we came from the bliss. We exist in the bliss. We return to the bliss. Meister Eckhart, Christian mystic, he said, God is like the child who clears his throat playing hide and seek so he will be sure to be found. You know, I love the video shows. Lori likes to watch the funniest videos on Sunday nights, you know. And they usually have one every month or so of little kids, you know, 3 or 4-year-old kids playing hide and seek for the first time with their parents. And mommy will say, well, I wonder where Tommy is. And the little one sticks his head out from under the blanket and he says, here I am, I'm hiding, Mommy. Get that picture in your mind that the divine love is clearing its throat. It wants to be discovered, but the discovery has to be ours. And it has to be something that we aspire to. That's why in the opening treatment, I said, let's set the intention to experience the unity. Now, this experience of unity that I'm talking about, we have to understand the difference between an experience and our interpretation of an experience, right? So one of the books I was reading this morning on the mystics was by Walter Stacy. I think that's, let me get it here. Yeah, Walter T. Stace, S-T-A-C-E. It's called The Teachings of the Mystics. This book was 75 cents when it was sold in 1960. I have no idea if you can find a copy of it today. But in this book, what he did was he looked at mystics from different traditions: Hindus, Buddhist, Islam, Christian, Judaism. And he tried to kind of identify a commonality of what is the mystical experience. And what he said this morning to get the book started is there's a difference between experience and the interpretation of that experience. And I would add to that, there's a difference between the experience, the interpretation of that experience, and then the expression of that interpretation. So we have an experience, we assign a meaning to that experience, we try to understand it with the intellect, we try to relate it to something that we already know, we try to make it fit into our existing patterns, and then we try to tell other people about it. So the example he gave is three people go out at night and they're walking down the path, and they see something white kind of glimmering off to the side, And what did they see? And one will say, well, I saw a ghost. That was a ghost that I saw. And another will say, well, no, I saw a sheet. Somebody had a sheet hanging on a clothesline, and it was flapping in the breeze, And somebody else will say, no, it was a rock. Somebody must have painted a big rock in their yard, and they painted it white, and the moonlight was just bouncing off of it. Now, they each experienced something. For the purpose of illustration, we'll say a glimmering white light, but each interpreted it differently. Each assigned a different understanding to what it is that they saw. Now, the first thing we have to understand is that none of their interpretations is what was there. It is what they think was there. It is the meaning that they assigned to what was there. And now you can imagine that all three of these people go back home and they start to explain to the people back home what it was that they saw, what it was that they experienced. And they probably don't have words to exactly capture what it was that they were experiencing. We resort in our language, we resort to similes and metaphors. We say, it was like this, it was like that, it was as this, it was as that. It was this, it was that. But the language and the words to properly try to communicate what they experienced, they're just not there. They're just not there. And then, of course, you add the other problems in communication, which is what I want to say and what I say are going to be two different things. And what you hear and what you think you heard are going to be two different things. And then the meaning that you assign to what you think you heard is another thing entirely. So I'm just trying to point out here that we have a problem. We have this problem in that what we are about in our growth is about having this experience, which is going to be a different experience for each and every person. And it's not going to be the same experience twice for any one person. But we are trying to experience the unity, the singularity, that which is beyond the pairs of opposites, that which exists beyond the paradox, And we are stuck in a world that is full of paradoxes. We are kind of almost trapped in a body by which our primary means of input are the five senses, and then the sixth sense, right? The thought sense, what we make of all this, where all the senses come together and somehow they get processed. And we have no way of knowing how that happens, right? Yet we talk about it all the time, as if we knew. Yeah. I heard this, I heard that. How did you hear? How? Explain to me how you heard. How did movement in the air become an idea in your mind? And is it your mind? Or is it just part of the mind that you use? We start to get into all of these really different philosophical questions. And we have to pull ourselves up to a halt at some point. Say that which we are seeking, that which is seeking us, is beyond philosophy. So language and questioning and reasoning and all of these different activities of the intellect that we are familiar with, even if we can't properly name them, even if we can't properly explain them, we are familiar with them. The very best that they can do is to point to something beyond. Point to something beyond themselves. So we look at life. I'll give a couple of examples, and then we had to get into, okay, so we stated the problem, which is we've been looking amiss, right? Somewhere in the New Testament it says if your prayers aren't answered, you've been praying amiss. And then there's something else is to know God rightly, to know God rightly. How do we know? How do we know that which is unknowable to the intellect? How do we know that? Do we really know, or do we just know our opinions, our experience, our interpretation of our experience, our expression of our experience? So if we wish to know this thing, I'm going to call it the unity. Right? And the reason for that is, if I call it God, everybody's got an idea of what that means. And now we are no longer focused on the thing itself, as Dr. Holmes told us. But we are focused on our concept of it. And we must get beyond concepts, that which is beyond words, but from which words come, that which is beyond thoughts, but which is from where thoughts come. There's a beautiful saying from the Sufis. It says, I do not wish to be the honey. I wish to taste its sweetness. I wish to taste its sweetness. In modern terms, we might say, did you stop and smell the roses, or were you analyzing the fragrance? See, there's a difference between analyzing, between thinking about, between weighing and measuring and all of those things, and just being in that experience, just being in that isness, that I amness, and that suchness. So what can we learn from the paradoxes, you see? What are the paradoxes pointing to? What is our language pointing to? What are the people who have experienced this oneness? And the people who have experienced the oneness, even albeit briefly, and I truly believe that each and every one of us, even if it just be briefly, has an experience of the oneness. And that is what the definition we're using of the mystical experience. And it's very important, I think, to settle in on the idea that the experience of oneness, I'm not talking about the conceptual acknowledgement of oneness. I'm not talking about saying, well, I came from my mother and father, and they came from their parents, and eventually we came, from somewhere, from some point of origin. So that point of origin must be one. That's a concept, you see. That's an interpretation. I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about the actual experience. The actual experience. An experience of oneness that is so profound that we come to know what Ernest Holmes was talking about when he said, I am not my brother's keeper, I am my brother. What Jesus was talking about when he said, I and the Father are one and you and I are one. And of course, according to Greek logic, if A equals B and B equals C, then A equals C, then we and the Father must be one. See, but we don't want to be stuck in our thoughts about that. We don't want to be stuck in an intellectual concept about that. We want to taste the sweetness, see? The experience. So in our culture, this idea of mysticism and mystics is kind of cloaked in mystery, right? And I remember as a child in school, when we would study the lives of the saints, and we would study about these people whose lives we were told were worth emulating and venerating. And I remember one time asking, well, how can I do that? How can I have that experience? Maybe third or fourth grade, I don't know. And the answer was, well, you shouldn't worry about that, you see. You're just kind of an ordinary person, and you just need to go about your life, and you need to follow the rules, and you need to obey the commandments, and you need to go to church on Sunday and put your money in the plate. And that's as much as, God expects from you in this lifetime. And the only reason I'm telling you that is that this idea of what it means, or what it meant at that time in my life, to actually be in that experience of the oneness, was made something unattainable to me. Or at least the idea that it was unattainable to me was given to me, and I accepted that. Okay, I took that in to be true. Okay, I'll just do what I'm told. Go to church on Sunday and put my money in the plate, kind of stuff. So we want to get rid of this idea that the experience of the unity, the experience of the oneness, is something that is unattainable if you have that idea. Everybody doesn't. I did. Everybody doesn't. And we have to get rid of the idea that it is something about religion, you see, that it is a religious experience. Now, Dr. Holmes made the definition very simple. He said, religion is your opinion of God. And everybody has an opinion of God. If you believe there is a God, that's your religion. If you believe there is no God, that's your religion. If you believe that the intellect is not capable of knowing whether or not there is a God, that is your religion. But as I say, we need to drop the word God. Remember the first talk every year start out, what is your realization of God? And this year, I used to say, what is your concept of God? And this year we move beyond concept to realization. What is your realization? But maybe we need to drop the word God. And maybe the word unity. Maybe the word unity will take us to a different place, to take us in a different direction, and get rid of all of the old ideas, beliefs, and superstitions, fears, all these things that we may have grown up with about this thing called God, and experience unity. Experience unity. So as I said in the email last night, my dad used to love to ask us when we were kids in school, what did you learn today? Every parent, what did you learn today? What did you do in school today? And we'd tell him what we did, and he'd say, well, yeah, well, if you're so smart, answer me this, which came first, the chicken or the egg? There's your paradox, one of your paradoxes. Which came first, the chicken or the egg? Well, you can't have a chicken without an egg, so the egg must have come first. But eggs come from chickens, so you can't have an egg without a chicken, so the chicken must have come first. But if you can't get a chicken without an egg, then the egg must have come first. And you can just get stuck in that mind-boggling circular argument. Right? Now, rather than get stuck in this, the paradox, maybe what we need to realize is there's something beyond the paradox. There was something before the chicken and the egg both. There is a singularity, a unity, a oneness from which they both came. So the paradox is pointing to something beyond, something beyond. In a similar manner, if we come to kind of a deeper question, if we look at life and death, now we typically think of life and death as being opposites, right? We think that death is the end of life, the negation of life. But is it really? Is it really? If there was no life, there could be no death. And yet life itself seems to come from death. The inanimate, the inanimate rocks and water one day sprung to life. Life takes on form for a little while and expresses itself through that form and then seems to give up the form. But then the form itself recycles and takes on new forms, new particles. As Thich Nhat Hanh was saying, if you look at anything, for example, look at a flower. A flower is made up of non-flower particles. Minerals and sunshine and rain, gases, fluids. Take that all apart and look at them. And it doesn't look like a flower. So I said last week, if you look at the $1.68 were the chemicals that our body was supposed to be made of, it doesn't look like a body. So the non-flower particles go back to being particles when the flower dies. And then they become particles of another flower. And the cycle goes on and on and on. If you've ever had a hedge, I had the people who lived here before we bought this house they planted a bunch of red-tipped hedges in the backyard, which I don't know, I guess at that time it was very popular in landscaping. They're all over this neighborhood. And I wanted to take them out because they kind of cut the yard in half. There was just the yard, and then there was this wall of hedges, and then there was a whole nother yard going unused behind it. Well, I've been trying to get rid of those hedges for years now. And I cut them all the way down to the ground. Get the chainsaw out and take them all the way down to the ground, Next year, they're sprouting up someplace else. Same hedge coming up someplace else. Looked like I killed it, but I didn't. Out of what appears to be death comes life, and out of what appears to be life comes death. And we have the paradox. And in the Bible, we're told God is the God of the living, not of the dead. God sends its rain to fall on the just and the unjust alike. This interpretation that we have of life and death is only our interpretation. And yet if we look at the paradox, we have to say there is something that is beyond or before that paradox. And that is what we are seeking. That is what we are seeking. That is what is seeking us. Now, having said all of that, these are ideas and concepts and philosophies and words, and none of that is the experience. People have an experience of unity, and they try to tell other people about it, and they can't express it. Plato gave us this example in the Republic of the example of the people who lived their lives in a cave, and they were chained together in such a way that they couldn't see the door of the cave, but only the shadows on the wall in front of them. And they believed that the shadows were reality. They believed the shadows were real. And one day, one of the inhabitants of the cave got loose the shackles and went out into the sunlight and was blinded by the light. And one of the things that people who have this experience of unity tend to say is the experience of the light. And then he could see that the people walking down the road and the horses going down the road and the carriages going down the road were much different than the shadows on the wall. And he went back in the cave and he tried to tell everybody, he said, hey, we've only been seeing part of reality. There's a whole different world out here. What we're seeing is not really real, it is just a shadow. And everybody said, this fellow's not well. He's crazy. We need to sit him down, take care of him. In more modern literature, if you've read Jonathan Livingston's Seagull, it was a similar tale. He kind of broke through the bounds that were holding the rest of the flock in place, and he tried to tell the flock that there was a totally different experience available to them, and they would not listen. They ostracized him. They thought he was strange. So we have this issue then in our experience that we are being driven, compelled, if you will, to seek, and we don't even know why we are compelled to seek. What tells us to seek? What is it that causes us to seek? Now, one thing is we can look at the paradoxes and we can recognize, well, there must be some place where the two are one. And what is that place like? Where is the paradox solved? Where are life and death both part of the same expression of life? Just different experiences in it. Place beyond sunrise and sunset, you see. So how do we get there? How do we get there? Now, this is why we've been talking about techniques for the last several weeks, One of the things that we have to recognize is that this thing that we call mind is not the appropriate way of knowing that which is before mind. If you want to know something, you have to know it in a way that is appropriate for that which you wish to know. All of our inquiry is coming from a place of ignorance. We don't know and we want to know. There's something within us that tells us there's something you don't know that you want to know. But what is it like on the flip side of that, where everything is known? What is that place where everything is known? And how can a tool such as the intellect, which only knows things by dividing and analyzing them and looking at little piece parts and then trying to take the piece parts and assemble them to see what the big picture looks like, how can that which only works in multiplicity understand that which has never been divided, never been out of its unity? This is the fundamental question to consider, not only for today, but for the rest of our lives. So we are trying to move somehow into the place that is before mind. Now, some of the activities we talked about were for stilling the mind, focusing on one point, keeping your focus on your breath, for example, and if you lose that focus, just simply bringing it back. And we talked about other techniques that serve to completely kind of shock the intellect into stopping momentarily by contracting our physiology, by using our body to control our mind. See, trying to use mind to control mind is an oxymoron. It's a paradox. How can you do that? You can't use mind to control mind. You can use mind to understand that mind needs to be controlled, but you can't use mind to control mind. This is the philosophy of Zen. So you must enlist the body to cooperate. This is why yoga postures are used. All these kind of things. Enlist the physiology of the body in order to develop that which you're looking for. But what we are trying to do is we are trying to get into the silence. Now, I don't remember who the quote came from, but it said that, silence was the best. Silence was the best thing for experiencing the oneness. And beyond that, it was music for this person. Music was the next best thing. But for me, music is not the next best thing, because when I listen to music, I become totally involved in analyzing it and, wondering what it would sound if it were played on different instruments, or wondering what would happen if we added a horn section to this, or if we added a harpsichord to it, and my head will compose all of that. So I'm not getting beyond, I'm getting stuck in it. But what I want to share with you, and we may carry this over to next week, what I wanted to share with you is art. The arts seem to have the ability for many of us to take us to a different place. They speak to us in a manner that evokes an experience. Not an analytical experience, I think I told you this. One time we went to visit our oldest boy, lives out in Seattle, and he took us on a tour of a winery, and they poured these little tiny glasses of wine for you to taste, and then they tell you all about the wine, analyze the wine, and how does it smell, and all this. And I thought to myself, we're not tasting the wine, We're engaged in an intellectual exercise about wine, but we're not tasting the wine. So what I'm suggesting then for art, I'm not talking about studying art and learning how to critique art and all the techniques. I'm talking about what is the experience? What is the experience that we have when we are involved with a particular work of art? Now, one of the things that works for me is poetry. And I'm going to share a poem from Rumi, and we'll probably share some more next week. And I'm going to invite you during the week to try to find for yourself techniques that help you get out of this paradox of the only tool that I know that I have is mind, and yet mind is not good enough. How can I walk that razor's edge? How can I use the intellect to help me understand that there's a place where the intellect doesn't work? And how can I use the intellect to find a practice that'll get me there? So this is one of Rumi's poems about a tavern. I want to share this. And I just invite you, see what you experience as you hear the words. See what feelings come up for you. Right? Don't try to analyze the meter or the rhyme or the words. Just, what do you feel? What do you feel as you listen to what he was trying to express? Rumi experienced the oneness. Rumi expressed the oneness through his poetry. And read this poem, and then we'll close for today. It's 4 a.m. Nasruddin leaves the tavern and walks the town aimlessly. A policeman stops him. Why are you out wandering the streets in the middle of the night? Sir, replies Nasruddin, If I knew the answer to that question, I would have been home long ago. All day I think about it. Then at night I say it. Where did I come from? And what am I supposed to be doing? I have no idea. My soul is from elsewhere. I'm sure of that. And I intend to end up there. This drunkenness began in some other tavern. When I get back around to that place, I'll be completely sober. Meanwhile, I'm like a bird from another continent, sitting in this aviary. The day is coming when I fly off. But who is it now in my ear who hears my voice? Who says the words in my mouth? Who looks out with my eyes? What is the soul? I cannot stop asking. If I could taste one sip of an answer, I could break out of this prison for drunks. I didn't come here of my own accord, and I can't leave that way. Whoever brought me here will have to take me home. This poetry, I never know what I'm going to say. I don't plan it. When I'm outside of saying it, I get very quiet and rarely speak at all. And now there's one more that I want to close with here. It's talking about gambling everything for love. Gamble everything for love, if you're a true human being. If not, leave this gathering. Half-heartedness does not reach into majesty. You set out to find God, but then you keep stopping for long periods at mean-spirited roadhouses. I'm going to leave with those two. Now we could go into a great discussion about what my interpretation of that might be, but my interpretation of that is of no importance. Did it do anything for you? Did you experience anything in the poetry? Did you experience something that takes you beyond the words into the experience, into your interpretation of the experience of what Rumi might have been feeling? We have a feeling, let's call it that. We have something that we wish to express. We have something that we desire to express. We kind of put some thoughts around that and assemble it into something that seems to make sense, based on our background, our education, our experience. We try to construct words and sentences, and then we try to express those. But in listening, can we invite our consciousness to move back beyond those words? Can we get into the feeling of what the poet is expressing? Can we sit hand in hand with the consciousness of a Rumi who's using the best tools that he has in order to help us to experience that which is beyond tools, that which simply is. Each one of us, each and every one of us, must find the way, a way, or ways to get our mind out of the stuckness of trying to solve riddles that don't need to be solved, of stopping at the mean-spirited roadhouses instead of being about our business, of taking the time that we need to take to do the things that work for us. Single point meditation, sitting on a bench in nature, picking up a pen and writing our own poetry, taking an instrument and playing our own music, finding a way, finding an appropriate way to know that which we are trying to know, which is unknowable to the intellect, but must be known by experience. See what works for you this week. Have a beautiful week. And so it is. And now let's come to a close with the same intention, because there's only one. There is one, just one. Out of the one comes many, and the many return to the one. And the many and the one are not different and separate. They are all the same. We recognize that we are the one experiencing itself as us, as unique, as individualized. And the idea of separation is only an idea, and an incorrect idea, an illusion. Today, we see things as they are, not as we interpret them. Today, we let dissolve all blocks, barriers, and boundaries that have been keeping us from experiencing the unity which is there. We accept that experience of unity into our hearts, our minds, our emotions, our bodies. We accept divine guidance to show us the technique or techniques that are appropriate for us, and we commit ourselves to using those techniques. We are grateful for the Rumis of the world and the Dr. Holmes of the world and all of the sages and saints and mystics and teachers who have gone before us, who have simply been way showers, pointing us to that which is beyond thought and before thought, to the isness, the suchness, the I amness. We are grateful to know there's a power in the universe that responds to us according to our belief, and we can cooperate with that power for the purpose of experiencing the oneness. We release this treatment to that power, knowing so certainly this is done that we say together, and so it is.